Good evening. It's like almost like the winter weather wanted to get us a second time, so we all made it. Uniquely enough, one of our esteemed panelists is going to actually be joining us via Zoom. Technology is great. Unfortunately, Naomi Myberger's plane and flight was canceled this morning due to the winter weather in the Northeast. So again, the winter weather wanted to attack us again, but we made it here. We're excited that you could be here, and we're thankful that we could host our second event of the year. And just appreciate you all pivoting with us from January when we originally had this event scheduled. Tonight, we have some incredibly talented and knowledgeable professionals with us to help educate our families as as we change and evolve with college athletics and the recruitment process and everything going on with the NCAA. Our program tonight reflects the efforts that we're making in our continued commitment to providing meaningful guidance to our student athletes and their families. Internally, our recruiting team meets on a weekly basis in partnership with our college counseling office to ensure that our students are receiving coordinated support and the most up-to-date information throughout their journey. Tonight is another example of that. I would be remiss if I didn't state that our journey for some of these student athletes is going to conclude a month from today with our college athletics commitment celebration, which will be on April 16th. And a number of our Westminster student athletes are going to join the hundreds of alums that have pledged to compete at the next level. If you don't have plans on April 16th, we hope that you can join us in that incredible celebration of hard work, determination, dedication for these great young people who are chasing their dreams. I'm Alex Ritchie. I'm in my second year here at Westminster. Just by a show of hands, has anybody in this audience been to one of our college athletics education events tonight? Awesome. This is the fourth one that we've done in my 2 years. We try to do multiple events each year. And we have some incredible incredible panelists that we've brought down from other parts of the country, schools of high academic, high achieving student athletes, very similar to our own here at Westminster. And quite frankly, we're just very thankful that they could take the time to be with us tonight. I'm going to introduce them now, knowing that you hear my voice plenty and certainly want to hear from them more so than me. Coach Naomi Myberger has served Georgetown University women's soccer as an assistant coach for over a decade and previously served as the head coach at Loyola University in Maryland. She has been a part of multiple conference championships and NCAA tournament appearances while developing incredibly talented and driven student athletes in high achieving environments. We're thankful that she's here with us tonight, and we'll see her in just a minute. Garrett LaRose is the head football coach at Washington and Lee University, where he has led the Generals program since 2018. A former wide receiver at WNL, Garrett guided the team to the ODAC championship in 2021 and earned Conference Coach of the Year honors in the same year. Garrett is also an alum of WNL, so we're excited that he gets to share his experiences at Washington and Lee, both as a student and now as a coach. And Connor Gallegos currently serves as the Assistant Director for Athletics Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Pennsylvania. A former student athlete at Georgetown, where he played men's lacrosse, he brings a strong background in admissions, enrollment strategy, and the student athlete support system in his work in college athletics in the Ivy League. My friends, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Coach Myberger, technology is great. Can you hear me on your end?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Coach. I'm going to start us off with a question to you. And from your experience, would love for you to dive into the actions by parents generally helping the student athletes prospects at a high academic Division I program, and what well-intentioned behaviors tend to hurt or complicate that process that you've seen in your career.
Nice, throwing me the easy one first, huh? Um, all right. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you making the adjustments here. So as you mentioned, I've been coaching for quite a long time, almost pretty close to 21 years now. So in terms of parents genuinely wanting to help their student athletes, I think I do think most parents and all parents are really well intentioned in their actions and behaviors. Some of the things that I've seen over the years that have been helpful are the parents who are really working to guide their student athlete in their decision, as opposed to maybe take over the reins, if that makes sense. And specifically, I can't tell you how many emails I get that are clearly written by a parent, not actually written by a student athlete, and you can tell pretty easily those emails that you get. And I usually just delete them because I know that the genuine interest is from the parent, not the athlete. Calling coaches, you probably don't need to do that. I'm sure most of you guys know that. Taking over when you're on the visit, of just overtaking the conversation, that could be pretty hurtful because, again, like, we really want to get to know your daughter or your son through the recruiting process. They're the player that we're going to be coaching. And while I can appreciate when we have, young player visiting campus, obviously part of the visit is having the family with them. We really want to see that that student athlete is taking over some of the initiative on that visit, or with that communication with the coach. I think a couple of areas that can be helpful for the parent to be more involved with would be financial discussions, as well as anything that might be related to health and well-being questions that may be a consideration for student athletes. And I think the soccer side of things, or the sports side of things, I know we have some other sports here, but that really needs to be driven. Those conversations need to be driven by the players.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Coach. All right, this question's for Coach LaRose. Dealing a little bit more on the specific side for football, but I know that Coach Myberger may have an opinion here as well. But could you talk about some concrete signs that families can see when their student athlete may be seriously recruited when it pertains to their football career, and what they could be looking for from a coach like yourself or your staff that may make them realize that they're being heavily recruited?
Yeah, I think important things that you're looking at throughout the process, and I think it's differentiating those key separators for each school. There's a lot of common practices out there this time of year, whether it's getting generic outreach on attending junior days, virtual things, mass emailing, that just to what we talk about from y'all side coming at us, we're going to be equally marketing back towards y'all in terms of trying to get interest, trying to cast our large net as we're going through it. And depending on the resources you have, some of that casting can seem more personalized. But I think one of the critical things that's going to begin to separate is beginning to have those personal conversations with the staff. And I think the student will quickly, and kind of give them credit there, understand where the interest level is. I talk a lot with our recruits because I do think this is an important part. Because as a Division III coach, I certainly know that Division III athletes are the backbone of our program. They're going to help us be successful, but we're also targeting Division I prospects. That's going to be the game changer at times, the difference maker. So as we go through that, we understand where we fit. So we'll have conversations with those recruits. Hey, this is our specific plan for you. This is the vision over the next 4 years. This is how I see you fitting into our program, our community, our institution. We're going to get much more in depth at an overall fit to make sure for us, also knowing there's roster limitations, there's support limitations. So the more in depth that I'm going to get, or our staff's going to get, on your individual fit, is an immediate sign you're a much higher level prospect for that program. And then if you're not getting that feedback, that may not be that school's process. And although a lot of schools on paper, as you look at them, you'll see admissions rates, you'll see cost of attendance, you'll see scholarships, a lot of things on paper. I'll just say my mom and my college search process, big chart person. So as you go through that, you're like, these schools are exactly the same. So what I heard from Coach X should be almost exactly the same as Coach Y. Well, that's not necessarily true. Each institution is going to have its own practices, its own goals in that recruiting class, both athletically and as an institution. And I think that's another piece that comes into the recruitment process each year, is we work hand in hand with our admissions office, knowing that our institution likes to be roughly 50-50 male and female. So we know in a year, if last year we were 48-52, that may change what we need to do, or it may benefit what we do. So it is really important that you're encouraging your child to have specific conversations with those coaches. And I equate it when we're coaching our guys up on doing their networking, right? If y'all in your professional spaces have had a younger professional reach out to you, three canned questions, those are the same three canned questions. To me, that doesn't show the interest. So why would I reciprocate that? You are just kind of out here. Maybe you were forced to be here. So for me, I think it is looking for a targeted feedback that is specific to you, your family, your fit, as opposed to that broad messaging that comes across that we all have to do. So I think some students will get enamored by the level or the color or they have a great graphics department, whatever it may be, but it's the specific that you really have to look for to understand if we're truly have a high interest level in that student athlete.
Thanks, coach. That's great. Connor, uniquely enough, you have a really, really exciting, awesome role in the Ivy League. And this is kind of a new world for all of us. So we'd love for you to just kind of talk about your role and what you're doing at Penn and how you're working specifically with the coaches and families in the process as they go through at an Ivy League institution.
Yeah. Everyone hear me all right? I hate my microphone voice, so sorry you're stuck with that tonight. Again, my name's Connor Gallegos at University of Pennsylvania. I have a very unique job, one that creates a lot of fun, pleasure for me, but a lot of hard work. Wear two hats there. So I'm the Center of Student Athlete Success Advisor for 3 different teams. So our men's and women's lacrosse program, as well as our women's rowing program. And then the bigger hat that I wear is I oversee with a team of 3 individuals oversee our athletic admissions and financial aid. And what that means at University of Pennsylvania, and it differs from every Ivy League school, is we serve as a liaison between all 33 varsity sports and their coaching staff to our campus partners in admissions and financial aid. So my involvement with coaches and especially our recruits is pretty, it's very involved and it happens very early as well. So, we have a lot of teams that do what I consider early recruitment. So we have committed athletes that start, their junior year of high school. We're going to have, our lacrosses, our field hockeys, some of our tennis. And so that's kind of the dynamic of early recruiting. And so what my job is with coaches is working with families. I look at all the academic information and I kind of forecast admissibility, because in the way the Ivy League works is as you get recruited the summer going into your senior year of high school, we do what we call a July 1 pre-read. And this is standard across all Ivy League institutions, but that's when we collect your academic information, whether it's transcripts, whether it's standardized testing. We send it up to our admission offices and that's where we get official feedback. So that's where we get the green light, the yellow light, hopefully never a red light. And so my involvement is working with our coaches early. I meet with recruits often, pretty much any recruit that comes to campus, as long as I've seen their transcript and, I've had conversations with coach, that's when I have access to the family and kind of, navigate those conversations. So it's a really fun, unique role. Like I said before, every Ivy League does it a little bit different. Penn just has a very hands-on approach. And so I think one of the coolest things about my job is I get to meet kids through their transcripts. My day-to-day job is not that fun. I look at hundreds of transcripts a day. But finally, when we do get recruits to come to campus and our coaches build those relationships with those students and their families, I get to put a face behind the transcript. And so my involvement is as early as junior year. And then once they get here to campus, depending on what sport they are, obviously I'm showing up to most every single game. I get a lot of validation in the work I do because I get to see them, compete, come to Penn, graduate, and then do pretty amazing things afterwards.
And then Connor's got to decide if he's going to go up to the Northeast and come back down for the NCAA tournament in Greenville in a couple days. So
Penn Quakers clinched the Ivy League. I don't know if you guys saw that, but it's a big deal for us.
he's had a good weekend. Coach LaRose at selective Division III institutions. Realistically, how many football players or can you guys support through admissions potentially in a given recruiting class, and what's really the difference between distinguishing that fully supported recruit versus maybe a walk-on, and are really walk-ons still prevalent?
Yeah. So I'll speak specifically to our institution first and then kind of cast it out a little bit broader. So when you look at us at WNL, it's both my favorite and least favorite part of our admissions process. I know I'm being recorded, so this may get back to Miss Richmond, but that's okay, is we truly have a holistic approach to admissions. So we do not work off of an academic index or things of that nature where, if you have X AP courses with these grades plus this test score, you're going to fit a certain band for us. We're still very similar to some of the language you've heard, red lights, green lights, yellow lights, based on that feedback, but they're going to look more broadly how they do that. And then holistically, I feel very fortunate that I work in an incredibly successful department. My wife is a women's basketball alum. We just hosted the Elite Eight. It was awesome. But our department is going to work collaboratively with admissions in the sense of we are going to have X athletes per year that admissions is going to project to us with probably about a plus or minus 10% that they're willing to be flexible on as we go through the recruiting process. Then we work internally with our ADs and the people in our department to then make a decision, okay, how are we distributing these across sports based on graduation, injuries, retention, all those different things. So specifically at WNL, if you were to walk into my office as a football recruit, what I would tell you is we're bringing in between 18 to 25 student athletes in the football program per year. That fluctuation is actually more marginal than that. It's usually right around 23. We have a institutional roster cap of 90. So with that, the math that I give to everyone is walk-ons are still a very critical part of our program. So with that, if we had a 100% retention rate in football, that would be no injuries, no lack of interest over a 4-year span, that'd be 92. We'd have to cut 2 student athletes. I'm very proud of, we have roughly an 86% 4-year playing retention rate within our program, which I think is pretty strong across Division III. But with that said, we need walk-on players, some that we may not have the space based on that year's recruiting numbers to support in the admissions process, to where that is obviously a very strong support that has a very low level of failure, which I would generally say is often student driven, whether that be something that wasn't disclosed or application related. So if you're supported by us, that's a very strong indication you're going to be accepted. If you're not, we still have a relationship in our system different than Penn's. We have liaisons within our admissions office that we're having conversations about. So any student that we communicate with that we know is applying and that we know we would roster, they're going to be aware of that. Now, I would say that that's a extra letter of recommendation in your file. That is not anything that I would cast significant weight to, but we would talk each individual recruit through that. So I think each high academic school is going to be slightly different how they approach that. I also think it matters if your conference is aligned. If you have a lot of similar minded schools within your league, sometimes you'll find that there's a more standardized process where we're a little bit of an outlier in our league. So our process is very different than other high academic schools, but also completely different than the models that are reflected within our league. So I think each school is going to be a little bit different. Walk-ons, I still think across Division III, critical, and it not necessarily a lack of interest from the staff in the player. Sometimes it's a need to meet certain positional needs. There's developing a roster. I don't care what level you're at, always is going to have different priorities. So I think that's something also is critical to understand when a coach is talking to you. Sometimes a lack of an offer in the way we operate is all offers are committable. So we don't put out offers that are for PWOs or anything like that. A lack of an offer is not necessarily lack of interest or an inability to play at our level. It's an inability to, at that time, prioritize that student athlete within our program needs. So I think it's different school to school. And again, that comes back to those specific questions that you need to make sure you're asking to understand those nuances of a lot of things sound similar, but why is this process slightly different as I navigate it?
Thanks, Coach. So the ESPN ticker has probably gone off while we've been here. So there's constant changes in Division I that we see on the ticker every day. So this question is for Coach Myberger. How has the current Division I recruiting landscape changed the level of competition for high school recruits at selective academic programs like Georgetown in potentially, weighing a high school prospective student athlete versus a transfer? And then really for your program in particular, what percentage do you think your recruiting is going to be falling into that transfer world, transfer portal versus, a high academic student athlete like the students at Westminster?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's probably a question that changes every day. So on today, the answer is the transfer portal really has changed Division I athletics in many ways. And I, even we get transfers from Division III as well. Some players that want to bump up, but I think there's 2 times that the portal opens, November, and then opens again for us, I think, in May. And so I think in the November portal, there were over 1,300 women's soccer players in that portal. We have about 380 Division I teams in the United States. So if you do the math, that means that if all those players are going to find a home, every single school needs to take, 3 to 4 transfers, and then probably release some players too. So um, it's been interesting. I think for higher academic schools, it is a little bit different because of the academic requirements for transfers. And, for a school like Georgetown, it's very difficult for you to transfer after your sophomore year and then still finish graduation in 4 years, because you need to have at least 60% of your credits have to be taken at Georgetown. So often what that means then is that if you transfer, you're probably going to lose some of those credits that you took at your previous school. Now, I think for us, we've had a couple transfers come in after their sophomore year, and they were able to kind of make up some classes over summer. But the majority of our transfers are going to be 5th years. And a lot of those 5th years are actually coming from Ivy schools. They may have been injured during their time there. They have a 5th year. They can't use it at the Ivies. And so we brought in players kind of as a stopgap for our recruiting. So the majority of our recruiting is still going to be built on bringing in high school athletes. But where we've used the transfer portal is almost as a stopgap. And I think other highly academic schools have done that as well, where, I'll give you an example. The last 2 years, we didn't really have a number 2 goalkeeper. We had a number 1, and we had a player that was still needing a lot more development. So we were able to bring in a goalkeeper from Harvard for her 5th year, and then actually goalkeeper from Dickinson, which is a Division III school in Pennsylvania, for her 5th year, and provided kind of a stopgap for us while we were developing some of the players beneath our number 1 goalkeeper to get them ready. So I think for the academic schools, it's not as crazy as it is at some of the other schools. I know if you just go and look online, even in women's soccer, there was a shuffling of coaches in the SEC. And I think, like half of one team from the SEC went to another SEC school, and it's like the whole team. So, but I do think at the more academic schools, it's typically used as more of a stopgap for kind of 5th years to bring in.
Thanks so much, Coach. All right, Connor, this is a pretty big one that we get a lot. Really, what is the academic profile necessary for a recruited athlete to be supported through the admission process at a place like Penn? And can you talk about maybe touching on the band system and how that potentially plays a factor in recruit rating as you all work through each of your respective classes?
Yeah. I'll start by saying that there's a lot of different pathways to get to an Ivy League school. The way that we recruit from all over the country, all over the world, there's not really one set academic profile that you guys need to build to be recruitable to admissions at Penn and other Ivy League schools. I'm going to speak pretty generally and give you guys some core foundations that we can kind of focus on through your time in high school. And this is just regurgitated from our admission office that, I hear them present to our coaches numerous times a year. And this is, the common language. So, our admission office wants to see 5 core classes taken every given year. And our core classes are science, social science, social science, math, English, and a foreign language. There's flexibility. I have a lot of students that I see and a lot of athletes that we recruit that will take up to, Spanish 1, 2, and 3. They're not interested in taking Spanish 4 come their senior year. And so there's flexibility. But what our admission office likes to see, especially with those students, is replacing one core with another core. I think what I see a lot of times with a lot of our students go into pretty amazing independent schools is you get a lot of class variety. And some of those class varieties that are offered to our students are deemed electives. And at times, they might seem pretty remarkable classes, but our admission office doesn't always prefer to see those. They want to see those core, classes. And I'm talking, from a science perspective, physics, bio, chem, those are your core classes. And so if you're navigating this recruiting process, ask your coach. The coach has good knowledge on kind of what you need to take, what your student needs to take. And they're going to provide you the best guidance to kind of be admissible. And that's kind of where my job comes in. I talked about the early recruiting, the early forecasting, seeing if guys or students are admissible to Penn. I offer a lot of guidance at not so much junior year schedule, but certainly senior year schedule, and making sure that what we present to admissions come that July 1 pre-read feedback, there's no red flags or any hiccups with that. So 5 core classes, pretty standard. What they want to see as well is rigor. And so rigor means honors classes, could be APs classes, IBs. And if you're sitting in this room today and it's 9th and 10th grade and you guys haven't taken your son or daughter have not taken an honors class, that's okay. Like I said, there's a lot of different pathways, but admissions needs to see rigor going through the high school time. And that's the AP, IB, the honors classes. And so ultimately, what you need to be showing in your portfolio, your transcript, your standardized testing is gradual rigor and then handling that heat and making sure that you're doing well. And so come junior year, couple APs, senior year, certainly more APs, but making sure that you do well in those classes to show admissions the admissibility piece. Does that make some pretty good sense? One thing I'll mention too is, not many schools are going back to standardized testing as quickly as some of the Ivy Leagues. Penn is requiring standardized testing, whether that's the ACT, whether that's the SAT. So what I tell our recruits and our recruits that come through my office is test early, test often. We super score our standardized testing, which most every university does. But starting your junior year, taking the SAT, if you want to play college sports and you want to go to a place like Penn, know that's a requirement. And so don't handcuff yourself and your family in taking the SAT just your senior year. Because you can take the SAT as many times as you want. We're obviously going to take the best scores of each of those. And then kind of how our coaches fill their recruiting classes. And I'll go into greater detail about this a little bit later, but it's hitting an academic index goal for each team. And so when I tell students that they should be testing early, testing often, not only are they building their admissibility, but they're helping their overall recruiting class hit their academic index goal, which is something I oversee within our athletic department, making sure our coaches are accountable, making sure that they're, not breaking any Ivy League rules, making sure that, our teams hit our academic index goals. So I'm speaking fairly general because there's a lot of different pathways to the Ivy, but if consistency with the 5 cores, having rigor, doing well in those classes, especially junior year, so you're building up your profile to show admissions, that's really important.
Thanks, Connor. Can you talk just for a moment about, maybe defining what we refer to as the band system?
Yeah. So that was a 2-part question that I missed. So the band system is really only used now for football within the Ivy League. But I talked about the academic index score, and that's so every student, as we go through the pre-read process, and I mentioned that July 1 where we send transcripts, your standardized test scores up to our admission office. Every student athlete that we recruit that goes through our pre-read process gets assigned an academic index number. And that's a combination it's a formula that's taken from your transcript, your GPA, and then also standardized testing scores. And so every team that we have outside of football, and I'll explain football in a second, every team has an academic index goal that every single one of our teams needs to hit. And it can vary from sport to sport. We have a collective athletic department AI goal, academic index goal that we have to hit. And so that's a huge priority for our coaches, and we make sure that we hold them accountable so that they recruit 12 athletes, that their overall average, academic index average, meets their goals. And that avoids headaches later on. That keeps us compliant with Ivy League rules. Let me talk about the bands real quick. Bands, our football players get assigned academic index numbers the same way any other athlete does. The way our football recruitment works within the Ivy League is they have a set number of supported athletes per band. And so one band could be from 184 to 195, and they get a certain amount of athletes in that bid. And then the next band from 195 to 201, and they get a certain amount. And so you have to build your class by fitting each student in the allotted amount of band numbers based on their academic index number. Again, that's just football. The way our other sports, every other sport that we work with, it's just an overall team goal. And then circling back to when I talked about test early, test often, you're building up your academic index by not only doing well in the classroom with your transcript, but also testing. And then testing often is going to help your other recruits out as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Coach. Coach Myberger, I'm coming back to you on the academic thresholds to be an ideal candidate, an ideal Hoya for Georgetown. And typically how many kids are you all looking at from the beginning of your recruiting cycle to the end? And can you talk a little bit in greater detail about ACT, SAT, GPA, course rigor, as well as we were just touching on with Connor?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, everything Connor said is pretty close to our kind of requirements as well, although we don't work within the academic index. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility with some things. Now, it is sport to sport at Georgetown as well. So the academic requirements, for us may be different than, say, our basketball team or even lacrosse. But yeah, I mean, like he was saying, the testing early is really important. We do look at SAT and ACT scores still, taking the core classes and then APs and honors in the junior and senior year is what we want to see. For our one thing that we kind of tell our recruits is, our average GPA for a non-athlete, so if you were just coming to Georgetown, would be a 4.0. And then our average, we look at class rank. So there's three things, I guess, to kind of go back: GPA, your class rank, your test score, and then they'll also look at your course load within that when they're looking at your transcript, as well as any relationship Georgetown may have with the high school or any legacy. But so from a GPA standpoint, if you were just a regular student applying to Georgetown, your academic profile would be about a 4.0 GPA. You'd be in the top 5% of your class, and you'd look for a test score of about a 1480 on the SAT and a 33 on the ACT. Now, for women's soccer, for us, we're tend to be a little bit below that requirement. So our average GPA is about a 3.8 for an incoming high school player, usually top 20% of class. And then their test scores, we're usually around a 1250 and then a 28 on the ACT. There's a little bit of wiggle room with some of those things. It's not a hard line in the sand, but that's kind of when we're looking at players initially. When I'm sitting down and looking at transcripts or looking at test scores, we're looking for things to at least be close to some of those numbers before we can really feel comfortable moving forward with that player. Trying to think, how many kids are in a class? So with the roster limits, this has changed a lot for schools. So for Division I, moving into roster limits, we moved in women's soccer, and you can look up for each sport the roster limits, but we have moved to now only being allowed to have 28 players on our roster. So what that means is we have to be pretty precise with our recruiting. Whereas before we might have had 30 to 32 players on our roster, those last 3 to 4 spots typically being allocated to kind of walk-on players or players that we weren't quite sure about. That roster now being tightened up, it means that we have to tighten up our recruiting a little bit and make sure that we're athletically bringing in players that we feel can help us pretty quickly, but then also academically making sure that they're players that are going to kind of balance out our class, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Coach. Coach LaRose, would I be putting you on the spot if you could share your statistics for recruitment to WNL from a GPA, SAT, ACT?
Yeah. So, talking about it from a perspective as a coach, because I think that was a good reference point made was kind of what do we look for in that, first look for us. Candidly, for me, GPA is irrelevant. I don't look at that initially because we recruit nationally. So there can be such a skewed difference of what's that 4.0 versus this 4.0. Are you on a 7-point scale, a 5-point scale? So for our office and what I encourage our staff to do is we want to see that transcript first for what both coaches, both folks here nailed. Do you have the rigor? Are you in the right classes? Are you getting predominantly A's? If there is a decline in grade, like, B plus, that's not a bad thing. That's still a good grade. Remind my boys that all the time. Is it in an AP course? So even though we don't necessarily want to see grade decline and increased rigor, but at least that's in a more challenging course instead of maybe an elective class where that means maybe you weren't focused. So we look at it more broadly from that perspective. Are you hitting some generic landmarks? Because there is such a variety. And I think that will be important as you look at different institutions and look at their rosters that you're being recruited to. Are they recruiting nationally? That could change what they're profiling as you do that. So for us, it does not start with a number because I think that number can be wildly misleading. So we talk about those core factors. From a testing perspective, we do remain test optional. So we would say for our recruits, in general, from a football specific at our institution recruiting philosophy, we will essentially submit every recruit test optional, knowing that we could utilize a test score if need be, if we don't get the feedback, because we do have a system where we can have students reread. But our average, I believe, was 32.5 or 33. I'm going to get in trouble on this one because the head of admissions is my liaison. And right around a 1450 to 1480 is, I think, our middle 50th percentile. So if a student's below that, it doesn't mean, again, they didn't do outstanding. They're in the top 96 percentile nationally. We just have a strategy on how we approach that. And then we'll talk to students about, it's 3 years of world language. You have to get into calc. So we understand that we have some specific institutional barriers that we're going to share with recruits so that if they need to adjust scheduling as they move forward. But I like to work outside of the hard and fast spaces because I think that's very challenging in a national landscape when you're fortunate enough to recruit nationally. Because then you put a number out there and people are like, okay, I have a 3.9. Well, your 3.9 is no honors courses, that you lack some of the fundamental backing to that we can't necessarily do. So we look at it from that core holistic approach and then utilize our university's numbers. If you're aligning with them, that's going to put you in a good position. And for the most part, the other piece that I will just from my experience, class percentile, that is important. Not everyone does class rank. I do think institutions understand different schools better. So WNL, I know we recruit heavily here in Atlanta across a lot of schools here. So we have great institutional knowledge. So even if you don't class rank, our admissions office is good at their jobs. They understand where you probably fit, but a majority of our incoming class will be in the top 10%. And typically those outliers, when you look at the flow chart, okay, you admitted 5% of your class outside of the top 10%, they're in the top 25%. That is only because that is the national metric. So admissions office do get hamstrung sometimes on what they have to present forward because it's a national standard. We'll often say if you're outside of that top 10%, it's hopefully small graduating class, right? There's a factor that puts you outside of that percentage. And again, we can go outside of that, but now you're talking about these need to be high impact players and there has to be other compelling facts in the case that allow us to continue to pursue you as a recruit when you talk about those kind of hard and fast lines, if you will.
So I just gave you the academic side, and now I'm going to give you the literal meat and potatoes question. As a former Division III point guard at 6'1", I can tell you that size and position needs and film and all those things are important as you're evaluating a student athlete. Can you kind of touch on some of the things that you're looking for in terms of a great prospect football recruit? What's the ideal lineman size? What's the ideal wide receiver 40 time? Can you touch on some of those more sport specifics?
For us, I think we're unique in the standpoint at Division III, and when you talk about Division III football specifically, we're the largest division. And I think you can look at that across Division III. So when you talk about the depth of opportunity and kind of, not, I'm humble enough to say, where you fall in the pecking order, sometimes those factors have to be less important. So certainly, I think if you're looking for that as a recruited athlete, right, I think the best thing you can do is go to the roster, particularly in football, because you will quickly find if that staff is, and I do have a nice degree in my office from WNL, but some of us are sizist. There's definitely that exists in our sport. So you will go and look at a roster and you'll say, there's not a single offensive lineman under 6'2", not one. That will clearly indicate to you that is something that staff prioritizes in the recruitment. They may not have a single running back who weighs less than 185 pounds. So if you do your homework and your due diligence, and that will give you a great indicator for that program, what they prioritize. I also think in the Division III landscape, I think you see some of the greatest diversity in schematics. I think when you look at higher levels, and I'll pick on things you can't pick on, the SEC. That is like watching the NFL. Everyone does kind of the same stuff, and it's Johnny's and Joe's, not X's and O's. That's why you get paid if you're a great recruiter. You don't necessarily need to draw touchdowns, to minimize it. Where at other levels, they may be looking for different things, because if I know every one of my running backs cannot be 6 foot tall, 205 pounds, and run a 4.5, because I do not coach at Virginia Tech, is okay, where do you fit then in that profile? So we look at how competitive are you? What level of football are you competing at? Again, I'm very fortunate to have long-standing institutional knowledge at WNL. So when I go to certain areas, whether, again, speaking here in Atlanta, that's why it was so exciting to come here, going down to Dallas, going up to the DC, Baltimore area. We have a good working knowledge of what the caliber of football is, what the level of competitiveness is. So to me, we prioritize bringing in passionate young men who are going to be, for me as an alum, great future alums to stand alongside of me at some point and represent our program and our institution as much as those measurables. Now, at the end of the day, yes, I don't want receivers who run 5.5. And I also don't want them to be 5.5 unless they run 4.2, right? So there are metrics that are pretty standard across football, but I think your best tool, and I think it goes across sports, is to go look at rosters. I'll pick on lacrosse. If all the long poles are 6'3", they prioritize length and size, right? Do they play with certain niche positions? Do they list a nickel in football, or do they only list 2 safeties and 2 corners? I think that's something that is easily accessible. It's out there, and you can also look at coaches over time. So you may be being recruited to a program with a new head coach or new coordinators, things like that. It's not hard to get information for you to start to understand what do they do, and then in your process, what are you prioritizing? The institution, the academic opportunity, the holistic academic experience, and the athletic experience is going to meet expectation. Is athletics at the top? And that's fine. Is that your priority? So that's where you're going to start. But I think you need to balance those. And I think that information is out there. And I think I have fights in my own office as the head coach on why I like this guy as an offensive lineman, and our offensive coordinator, fellow alum, O-lineman, All-American, doesn't. So I think there's a lot of conversation. I don't think there's any one way to do it. And we want great football players in our program. That is not necessarily a size metric, but there are certain things that you can look at programs and see, do I fit what they do, and do I fit the people they bring in?
Coach Myberger, would I be putting you on the spot if I switch sports to soccer and see if there were any metrics that, stand out to your staff as you all go through recruiting?
No, that's fine. Soccer is it's becoming more of a data-driven sport, but it's not something that we generally use for recruiting. So we don't have, numbers and size and heights and weights. But I think it depends on the school, and it kind of depends on the style of play, because there's different ways to play. I think for schools that play a more direct brand of soccer, where they're going to just try and go forward as quickly as possible, they're going to be looking for runners, and they're going to be looking for players that have size that can push the ball forward very quickly. For players, or teams that try and play a little bit more, size still somewhat of a consideration, but less so in certain positions like outside back or potentially an attacking midfielder, where you're looking a little bit more for creativity, certainly in the midfield, and probably athleticism in the flanks, less about size. But it does depend and vary school to school, like coach is saying about different coaches having different priorities and how they want to play and what they look for. And you certainly could go onto the roster and take a look, but I think one of the easier things to do is to try and watch a game, watch a couple games of a team that you're interested in and see, like, if I'm a 5'4" attacking midfielder, very creative, but maybe I'm not the biggest kid. Is this team playing a super direct style of play where it's going to be like ping pong and I'm watching the ball go over my head? Or is this a team that maybe is trying to move the ball through the middle and I'm going to fit into their style of play? So, yeah, I mean, I think it does vary coach to coach, but I think, for a team that may try and play a little bit more, you're looking for size in specific spots, but not every spot. Goalkeeper is definitely a spot you need size in. If you're a 5'3" goalkeeper, probably Division 1 is going to be very challenging for you.
I'm gonna kind of continue with this topic, but could the both of you also touch on, a student athlete is at the high school level, and then they come join your program, and they're being exposed to nutrition, they're being exposed to strength and conditioning. Can you talk about like how those metrics and things like that are developed from a 16-year-old athlete to an 18, 19-year-old athlete, and some of the things that you all are doing on your campuses that, are pretty exciting?
I'll let you go first, coach, since you're not in the room.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think more and more, I think there's more information available to high school athletes around nutrition and around strength and conditioning. However, I also think more and more, sometimes that information isn't always the best information. So sometimes you have players come in with ideas about what strength and conditioning looks like at the collegiate level or what it should look like for an athlete. And I'll give you an example. I don't know why this is the case, but a lot of girls think if they go in the weight room that they're going to get big and that they don't want to lift heavy weights and they don't want to do heavy things because they think it's going to cause their muscles to explode, which physiologically is not going to happen unless they are absolutely 100% trying to gain a ton of weight and get huge. So I think that's one of the challenges we have is kind of that misnomer of getting them into the weight room and getting them to embrace it. Because I think when we've been able to get players to embrace it, their performance on the field has, really excelled. And I do think one of the things we use that's been a tremendous asset for us is the use of the GPS systems in monitoring our training load, but it's also been a great tool for our athletes to see their progress when they look at, oh, wow, as I've been on this strength program, I've gotten faster, I've gotten more explosive, I have a top speed, that's reaching for our players, 20, 21, miles per hour for a top speed is pretty good for a female athlete. But those players have been the ones that have embraced kind of the strength training. The nutrition side is always tricky, I think, especially for female athletes. Unfortunately, I think our society has a lot of misinformation about how to fuel your body and what a female athlete will look like. Most female athletes are not going to look like a magazine model. And I think that's one of the challenges we have at the Division 1 level is to try and get athletes to understand that being strong is a good thing and that it's a helpful thing. And so we do have people on staff. We have a nutritionist that works with us. We obviously have a full-time strength conditioning coach. And all of those pieces, in addition to our athletic training room and medical staff, we try and really push positive messages to our women around body image, around nutrition, around strength conditioning. And I think that's kind of a full comprehensive thing that we try and really focus on, and I know that's been a big consideration throughout the NCAA with student health and well-being and mental health, being a pretty big part of that as well.
Thanks, Coach. Kind of, I'll start piggybacking a little. I do think from a resource perspective, particularly schools represented here, I think the student will have access to what they need. I think depending on what your program's approach is, how you go about it, is how will they maximize their access to that, whether it is their student mental health, it is their nutrition, it is their going to the trainers, all those things. A lot of that is not just about the resource being there. It's also the students' access and intentionality in their approach to those resources. And I think that's a big part in the high academic space. It is trying to balance that amongst a rigorous schedule academically, those stresses. You also have like normal college life. You're going from being 18 to 22, trying to get a job. So, I think we have a lot of great resources in place for our athletes, but how do we balance it as coaches of making sure they understand it, but we're not adding undue stress additionally to them about now maximizing all of that. So certainly I wish all of the players on my roster just wore those people out on our campus. Absolutely. But at the same time, I think it's our job to school them up, give them access, but then it's also part of being an athlete. You have to take advantage of what's there. And if you don't, that will speak to your coach as well. When you talk about it more just from transitioning from a high school athlete to a college athlete, I think for me, just what's resonated a little bit, and it's the refreshing part of when you get to be around like-minded institutions, one of my least favorite phrases, but you have to throw it out there, is when you look at the high academic space, it is still very high school athlete recruiting driven, right? We've heard multiple things about the portal not being this great space for us for whatever reasons. So there is a development aspect to our recruiting process that may supersede other levels. And you may be an athlete who is fringing, whether it's between my institution and these two, them and the next one up, right? That there's a real part of that. And I think as you move down the food chain, development is still a very critical part of athletics. It gets lost at some levels. They have a perception of a finished product. If you're not the 5-star, you're not the finished piece, we don't even look at you. At our level, it is very much so about that. So your relationship with your high school coaches is critical, because who's going to be the best resource for us to get that information? It's going to be your coach, getting on a call with them. Hey, this young man just started playing his sophomore year, thought he was going to be an All-American baseball, going to go pro, going to be an NBA player, but finally got him out on the team. Hey, just wait till he figures it out and his frame can hold 25, 30 more pounds. I trust people who are in my industry space. I trust people who I know we have to have a repetitive relationship. So that development is still very key. And that is something I also believe, is that if they're telling me, hey, I have reservations about this recruit because maybe they aren't hitting that benchmark, that perception of size, weight, speed, but I have someone who tells me, hey, wait till you get them away from high school distractions, whatever it may, there's college distractions too. But if you can get them into a more competitive space with people who are driven, and that's one of the part of high school athletics too, not everyone you're playing with wants to be a college athlete, and that's okay. It's still a great part of community. It's a great part of your high school experience. Everyone who's there in the locker room came there to play college sports. So there's just a different motivating factor of what do we think we can get out of an athlete? What will our environment bring? So I think the development piece, particularly at the higher academic across all divisions, tends to have a higher premium because you don't have the luxury always of recruiting the 5-star. So you are putting stock into the resources you have to develop someone. And again, that's to asking the coach, it was earlier, where do you see me? Hey, I'm projecting in 2 years, if you can accomplish this, you could be an all-conference player for us, an all-region player for us. We try to be that specific in our process. And I think most coaches will try to give you that kind of honest feedback of, hey, your frame looks like this, or we believe you could do this. And at some point, you also have to bet on yourself in this process.
Awesome. Thanks, Coach. So we were having dinner before, and one of the hot button topics that came up, I wanted to pose this to Connor. We talked about reclassification and the popularity of potentially reclassing and what that's looked like and what you're seeing in trends, specifically at the Ivy League, but also what you're hearing in the Division I world. Can you talk a little bit about, what that's looking like and what trends you see maybe moving forward when it comes to reclassification?
Yeah. So in my lens, from what I see, we don't we certainly see a lot of classifications. We definitely see a lot of post grad years. But when we talk about the reclassifications, it's generally done from one school to another. So if they're transferring from a school for whatever reason that might be, they might repeat a grade there. So what I do not see really ever is a reclassification done within the same school. The most common route for Penn athletics is the post grad year. I would venture to say, there's conversations within every single team, probably less so on the female side, more on the male side, that if they're talking to a recruit, and whether it's, they're right on the threshold, or maybe they're just not quite big enough, or even if, from an academic standpoint, they've, done pretty well through here and they just need one extra year to bolster their overall GPA, bolster that academic index number I referenced back earlier. We see a lot of our student athletes go through the postgraduate route. That's common in our region, being in the Northeast. There's a wide variety of independent schools that offer postgraduate years, whether that's right across the bridge in New Jersey, pretty close by, with some great schools like Lawrenceville, and then you work your way up the Northeast corridor all the way up into Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, all those places. Fun fact, I took a postgraduate year before going to Georgetown. That was kind of the conditions of my commitment. I was recruited late. I was a little bit of a late bloomer playing lacrosse. And ultimately the coach said, hey, we filled our recruiting class. We had, 10 spots. We don't have any more. We want you, but would you entertain the idea of doing a post-grad year? Georgetown was 35 minutes away from my mom and dad, the most southern school that was recruiting me at the time. So I was like, yeah, I will do 1 year up in Connecticut to give me an access to a great education at Georgetown. And so I see a lot of our families, I see a lot of our coaches utilizing it, requesting it for our students, that recruits that they really, really want to have on their roster. And for one reason or another, maybe it's just not possible to get them in to Penn for that specific recruiting class. And so I think it's a great opportunity, assuming it makes sense financially with the family. I know a lot of those independent schools have great financial aid offices that offer opportunities, whether it's merit-based, whether it's need-based. And so when you have conversations with coaches, and perhaps maybe it's leaning in the direction that they're not going to offer you, have the conversation with them. I think you can be open and say, hey, would taking a post-grad increase my opportunities to be recruited here at Penn or at Georgetown? Those are very fair questions to ask a coach. In fact, if I were a coach, and I don't want to speak on behalf of them, I would love it if a family that I was currently recruiting maybe offered that, because that's one name off my next recruiting board in the following year. So you have like a commitment right away. And so that's another year for you to grow, again, physically, to be more competitive in the sport. From an academic standpoint, gives you opportunities to make yourself more admissible. And so, I had a great opportunity. I know every student has their own unique and their own path towards it. But definitely encourage you guys to have conversations with coaches when it comes to post-grad years. And if they ever ask you to do a post-grad year, just ask them through the details. I mean, that's pretty common within at Penn and within the Ivy League. And so they're very familiar. They'll be able to, kind of connect you with different schools of that nature as well.
Awesome. Connor, I'm actually going to stay with you. We talked a little bit about this with WNL, and we talked a little bit about it with Georgetown. But can you talk about active advocacy that UPenn coaches might have with a recruit, so that our families could understand what that looks like from an Ivy League example?
Yeah. My message is not going to differ too much what the other coaches have said. Our coaches, each of our teams get an allotted amount of supported slots through admissions. In a perfect world, I know our coaches would take every single kid possible. There's roster limitations. There's Ivy League guidelines that kind of prevent us recruiting over the amount that we kind of give to them. And so our coaches, when it comes to supporting the application, our coaches are instructed to be very clear in that communication. There should be no miscommunication when a student is committed to us and getting supported through our admission office. When you are going to apply on your own, And again, this is something that I think transparency between parents and coaches is paramount. And so if at any point in the recruiting cycle, you're not sure where you are, ask the coach directly if they are going to support your application through admissions. All right. That creates headaches, that prevents headaches later down the road, but it also just keeps an open line of communication. At Penn, there again, I mentioned there's a certain amount of supported slots we get. Coach mentioned that sports at WNL, football at WNL can't exist without walk-ons. We are no different at Penn. We rely heavily on not only our recruited athletes, but our potential walk-ons, because they fill up our rosters and they add great depth. They're great people. And eventually our development with our coaches, they can become really good athletes. And so be clear in that communication. We have a certain amount of supported slots that coaches will offer to students. But then on the other side, if they're not offering that spot, they might encourage you to apply on your own. And know that if you were to get in, if they have that language, you are part of the team.
Thanks, Connor. So, Coach Myberger, we really would love your opinion on, maybe pointing out some indicators that our parents could utilize to know whether their child is really being competitively recruited at the Division One level, or whether they should, broaden their horizons to look just not at specific one place or, the Ivy League, or, we try to educate them on building a broad list, but can you kind of provide us maybe some indicators for our families to know and understand that, they are in the right realm on where they should be, or maybe whether they should expand that?
I think that's a really fair question. I think first of all, your best resource for what level you can play at would probably be your club or high school coach. They've been through the process. They've seen athletes who have played at the Division 1, 2, 3 NAIA level, and they can provide some good, like, honest feedback if you're willing to listen to it. And I think, man, I have a lot of stories about this, but I'm gonna try and focus it because I know we're kind of towards the end here. I mean, I think how to know if you're a Division 1 athlete, if you're getting attention from Division 1 schools. If you're getting attention, if those coaches are being specific in their communication with you, they're sending you an email, they're calling, they're talking to your club coach, they're putting in time and effort, then that would kind of indicate, hey, this coach is interested in their Division 1 school. I think it's really it's kind of like if you have a crush on the cute guy at school and you keep passing him notes and you keep passing him notes and you never hear anything back, he's probably not that interested. But likewise, if you pass him a note and he responds, well, hey, all right, I must be pretty cute too. I must be I must be in the right spot here. It's pretty much the thing with college recruiting, not to simplify it too much, but if you're getting attention from those schools, then you're probably at the level where you can play at that school. And if you're not, then you need to kind of keep your options open and broaden your horizons. And I will say that not getting attention from a Division 1 school has nothing to do really with it. It's not always your ability. There are some fantastic schools at the Division 2, Division 3 level who have players that can play at the Division 1 level for sure. In women's soccer, like Johns Hopkins is fantastic. I think they would beat probably most of the most schools outside of the top 25 of women's soccer. I think they would be able to compete with. So there's some really good schools, and I think sometimes people get hung up on Division 1 or division, what division I'm playing. But there's not that much that separates those schools from an athletic standpoint. But in terms of, interest, I think some very specific things you can do. One, make sure you're sending a personal email to, that coach or that staff from, obviously from your kid. When you get to the point where visits are allowed, which is June 15th, after your junior year, you can ask, hey, can I come on a visit? Can I visit campus? Sorry, it's August. It's August for us now. June 15th is the phone calls. But you can ask, hey, can I come on a visit? And if that coach is offering you an official visit, which means they're paying for it, then you know that they're interested. If you go to a camper clinic, you can ask for specific feedback and ask like, hey, do you see me as a player who could compete at your level? But I think the best place to start again is with your club or high school coach. Put together a list of schools you're interested in. You know, you can kind of go to them and ask, hey, is this realistic for me? And they should be able to provide you some feedback on, hey, yeah, I think this is probably a good spot for you. Or they may say, hey, you know, you might want to expand your horizons a little bit.
Thanks, Coach. All right. Well, we've had a variety of different topics and some great conversation here. Um, First off, I want to thank each of you for spending time with us. But I wanted to give each of you just a moment, maybe any last bit advice that this community could take away from tonight that they could utilize for themselves or for their student athletes. And I'll start it with Mr. Connor.
Awesome. I'll let the coaches give their coaching perspective. I'll say when I have recruits that come through my office, the one thing I say is the job is not done. All right. And so getting recruited by an Ivy League school, whether it's Penn, whether it's Princeton, could be WNL, it could be Georgetown, the job isn't done in the classroom. All right. So continue to work hard. Obviously find balance, enjoy senior year, but put forth, a presentable transcript that is going to see you through the finish line. Finish your senior year with the same momentum that you anticipate starting with in your college year. And open communication. I think that's really important as you guys navigate the recruiting process. One thing that I enjoy saying, and I get a lot of, prospects that don't really understand what I do, so they reach out to me. But it means a lot when they do reach out, and they reach out persistently. And generally I get those emails and I just forward them right on to the coaching staff. So don't I would encourage your sons and daughters to, reach out. Don't be afraid of not getting a response, but know that if they do get a response, it's because they were being proactive in this process, and that goes a long way. They need to learn to advocate for themselves. The only way they can do that is putting themselves a little bit on the edge of, failure and go through that process. It's, Coach mentioned, it's like the dating game. There's going to be a lot of prospects out there. This opportunity that these students have getting recruited at these high-end Division I, Division III, Division II schools, whatever it might be, not many students get this opportunity. So visit schools, talk to coaches. The students need to get to know the student athletes that they're visiting, get to know the team that they could call brothers and sisters for the next 4 years, ask questions, really soak it in, and just understand that this is such a privilege of a process. I was lucky to go through it. And again, not many students get this opportunity. So it's really neat that you guys are navigating this. It was a pleasure to be in front of you guys. This is an amazing school, pretty nice campus too. And so that's what I'll say.
Thanks, Connor.
So I'll echo part of that. I think it's really important as you go through the process, defining the roles for everyone in the process. The student, you have to do the grades. You have to take care of your application, your essays, making sure you're the right student on campus. I know it's majority parents, but at the same time, you have to empower your child to do that. You have to give them the space to succeed and fail. I think that's really important for them, because when they come to us, I do hopefully help our young men develop and grow, and are there for highs and lows during their 4 years. Like, that's probably the most rewarding part of being in this business, beyond wins and losses for sure, is that interpersonal part of it. But that's got to start here, of them starting to learn where that is, because as you go through the process, if I don't hear from the student athlete, then how can I believe that once they're up in Lexington, 8 hours away, or wherever they may land, that they're prepared to go on this journey now with us? And when I say prepared, that doesn't mean they're ready to get an A+ and crush everything, but they are self-reliant. They can go out on that limb, because then going to the dating game, because I did enjoy that part of it, is I also want to be clear, we have all been broken up with way more than the student athlete does. Y'all will pick 10 schools, you'll profile them, you'll recruit. We're going to recruit 5, 6, 7, 1,000 students per cycle that we'll at least start a conversation with, to end up with 20 some. So understand that when you're going through this process, it's, parts of it are transactional. Maybe for some coaches, that's probably not the best way to do it, but it is a person to person process. Like, we're right out there on that limb with you going, man, we love you. I hope we get the opportunity to coach you. You may find something better than what we are, but if we're fortunate to come together, we're right out there with you. And I think sometimes that gets lost too, because we get to wear cool logos and we've done it for a long time. So we're well trained in our craft, hopefully. So it sounds great and confident, but we're people too going through this process. And again, that's what it's going to be for 4 years. So as you go through it, empower the athlete to do their part of it, let them grow that experience, let them succeed, let them fail, and then look at us as coaches or as resources through the process. We're people too. We'll appreciate the same things you would in the process. So just don't look at it necessarily as a power part of it either. That's a struggle sometimes too, because sometimes we just want to get to know you on a personal level. You're not just head coach, associate head coach. Really cool title at Penn. Sorry. It is. So, but at the same time, we're people, we're in the process with you. So appreciate that side of it as well as you go through it. That personal touch is important.
Thanks, Coach. Coach Myberger, the last word.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think for me, character counts. That's the biggest thing when we're recruiting players. And I think both the gentlemen tonight would agree with that as well, is that we'll pass on players. They might be in the national team. They might be players that could come in and help us win, a national championship. But if we're going to have problems with them off the field, or problems with their parents or family, or we think it's going to be a headache, we'll pass. So when I go out, I'll watch the sideline. I'll see how those players are responding to their coach. I'll pay attention when they come to visit, how they respond to you as their parents. I think that's a big part of it, is we're going to be spending, a lot of time with your son or your daughter. And as much as, it's an investment for them to come to our school, we're making a pretty big investment, as well, of our time and our resources, and spending time with them, and making sure we bring in the right players to bring in the right culture. And I think that's a huge part of building a program and building a championship team, is bringing in players that have the right character. And so, I think, Westminster is a great school, and it's much more than just a school and much more than just athletics. They're really working to build people for life. And I think that's what we as coaches are trying to do too. So I'm really excited to have been here and been a part of such a cool opportunity. So thank you.
Well, it's our plan to actually get you to Atlanta on the next go round. Delta's defeated us twice with this winter weather, but we're certain that we'll get you down here in the near future, because we have a tremendous girls soccer program that we're certain that you'll be interested in spending some time with these great kids. Could I just ask each of you to thank this great group that we've had tonight? Let me just say, it means such a great deal for you all to take the time out of your day, traveling away from families, to be with us on a reschedule. And we made it work. So we're just super thankful for you all to share your expertise. And it's clear as to why you all have been as successful as you've been. And it's our hope that we have some potential Wildcats with you guys in the near future. So again, thank you all so much for being here tonight, and joining us. And thank you all for coming back, and joining us this evening. As we stated earlier, we've recorded these sessions. So if you ever need to utilize them as a resource, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email, alexritchie@westminster.net. More than happy to share them. You all may know this. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old back home, and so my work hours are a little bit non-traditional. If you have any questions or need us to follow up with our panelists at any time, please don't hesitate to send those over as well. We're more than happy to connect those dots for you, because we're all in this together. We're in this for our kids. We're in this for our community. to help in any way that we can. We certainly are excited about what the future has in store for our Wildcats and for our community together. And it takes all of us. It takes these great coaches and staff members from athletic departments. It takes parents and it takes great coaches that we have. Coach Stewart, thanks for being here tonight. But thank you guys so much for being here. We're excited about what the future has in store, and please don't hesitate to utilize us as much as we possibly can to help these kids achieve their goals. And we really appreciate you all being here. Thanks.